Quick score update. Indiana on the women's side leads Utah 76-68 with 3.9 seconds left. I think it's safe to say that one is over. And it looks like whenever South Carolina takes care of business against the Tennessee Tech Golden Eagles, that they will face Indiana in the second round. And yeah, Mackenzie Holmes ain't walking through that door, but Indiana's still a really solid team that is battle tested in a really good Big Ten conference. That's who they're going to play in the second round. So that one was just moments away from ending. Again, tip-off will be over at 4. You can hear that on 98.5 OMG. Some breaking news to get into real quick. This comes from Joe Tipton and On 3. Quote, this is his tweet that he had just a couple minutes ago. News, South Carolina guard Zachary Davis will enter the transfer portal. He tells On 3 Sports the 6'7 junior averaged 8.2 points, 4.6 rebounds, and 1.8 assists per game this season. So when it comes to roster construction in what is a massive offseason for Lamont Paris and his team, there is a little bit of replacing having to do over at the wing position. Zach Davis was a really good cutter off ball, solid defensive player. I really liked what they did with the 1-3-1 at times last year. I almost kind of wish we saw more of that this year because Zach Davis played the top of that 1-3-1 so well, but he's in the transfer portal now. So now you're not only going to have to replace Jamari Thomas, potentially Colin Murray-Boyles. No word on what his decision yet is as it pertains to either staying for another year or leaving early for the NBA draft. More than likely, I think he plays in the draft or goes into the draft just because of his position of a prospect. But now you're going to have to replace Zach Davis too. So there's a lot of portaling having to be done and figuring out how good your freshmen are that you're bringing in and if they can play right away. And if you don't take care of business in the portal, you're going to have to play them right away, and you're going to be a really young team. That's a big thing for Lamont Paris to figure out is replacing that production and getting guys in who are able to defend at the level Zach did, because if anyone knows anything about Lamont, he comes from the Bo Ryan school of tough fundamental defense, man-to-man, not switching. You're going to be on the lookout in the portal for a player who can fill that role. So we'll see if he's able to do it. But now that the portal is about to open up, we're going to see a lot of who's available, especially when a lot of these mid-major schools ultimately get bounced from the NCAA tournament. We'll get a better look as to what the player pool is going to look like. So that's something we'll keep talking about. I'll discuss that with Jack Veltri, too, who's going to join me at the top of the 4 o'clock hour, going all the way up until 5. He's over in Arkansas right now as the Gamecocks prepare for a massive series. I mean, they're 1-5 in the two biggest series this year. You got Arkansas, a team who's a little different than Arkansas teams of past. The pitching's not as good, but man, the top 6 in that lineup can absolutely rake. So an amazing group of hitters that this pitching staff's going to have to face. I'll talk more about that with Jack Veltri in the next hour. But I mentioned it to end the last segment, and I'll mention it right now. Will Wade is one of the good guys of college basketball. I'll say it again, and I'll say it with my chest. Will Wade has become one of the good guys of college basketball because of how he has handled the McNeese State situation. And his transparency and his honesty is not one of the reasons why his players love him, and not one of the reasons why he's going to take a couple of those cats who can play pretty well over to NC State with him when he eventually takes over the Wolfpack job. But it's the reason they won yesterday. I don't think they win if he's not as honest with his players. I don't think they pull off that upset against Clemson if they don't have total buy-in and playing for each other the way they did. Now, bear with me here. What's made this McNeese State situation so unique is that in college sports all the time, specifically in this tournament, there are coaches who have 1 foot in the room with the players, 1 foot out the door to the next destination that's going to pay them more money and give them more resources. That is a tale as old as time in college hoops, especially at schools like McNeese State. Will Wade was asked earlier in the week about whether or not he's been in contact with NC State. And he didn't lie. He said, yeah, I've been in contact with NC State. And then an even crazier thing happened the next day. An even crazier thing happened. He took the job, and it was announced. It was leaked. The guy coached a game yesterday, and everybody on planet Earth knew that he wasn't going to be there next year. And the school didn't care because he was honest with them. His players didn't care because he was honest with them. And that goes a long way. They got to play with a reckless abandon yesterday that maybe they don't play with if they are mentally in the back of their minds in limbo as to whether or not the coach that recruited them to play there is going to be there. But it's not just Will Wade's honest relationship with his players that has made him a good guy in this situation. 6 or 7 years after an FBI investigation found him to be breaking rules left and right and forced him out of the LSU job. But when Will Wade was on the field of 68 last night, Andy Staples got the screen grab and a transcript of what he said. This is the reason why these players love playing for Will Wade. Here's the quote. Quote, shoot, half the kids I recruit, the goal is to go Power 5 after this year, Wade told the show. Some of you guys can go with me. We all know what's up. For our guys, this was great for them. They've got a lot of schools in their DMs looking to pick them up and pay them. Have we seen him in majors, Coach, talk about the willingness of teams to recruit his players and do it in a happy tone? Jim Mora, after his team at UConn won the Fenway Bowl, went on a rant post-game about how many teams were trying to pick up his players. And he was protective of them. And as he should be, you should be protective of your players. But you don't want to keep them from getting opportunities that they earned the right to get. These players at McNeese State, by dominating their conference and becoming a 12 seed and beating the hell out of Clemson in the first round of that game, have earned the chance on a national stage to be able to take their talents elsewhere. That's an attractive thing for these players because Will Wade wants what's best for them too. And then being able to play with that freeness, that opportunity to know that this is our last go round together, I think played a really big role in beating Clemson. And I'll use some of my personal experiences here. When I was at Middle Tennessee State, I covered a team on a daily basis that won 26 games, was ranked for the first time in school history. All they got to do is not blow it in the last week of the regular season and not blow it in maybe the first round of the Conference USA tournament. Well, they lose to Marshall on the last day of the regular season at home. And around that time is when the rumors started swirling that when Ole Miss fired Andy Kennedy, that school had one option only, and that's head coach Kermit Davis. Everybody knew on campus within that program, this is the last run for Kermit Davis, but he was never openly saying it. And he never told that to the players. Never once did. And I think that team played tight whenever they got to that first round game against the Southern Miss team that they beat by 30 plus both times they played them. They played tight. They played like what our friend Langston Moore would like to describe as lemon butt, and they blew that game. Southern Miss got up early. They fought back and took it to overtime, but then lost to the 8th seed in that conference, and they were not dancing. They did not hear their name on Selection Sunday, and they missed out. And I think the lack of transparency between coach and team and the feeling of, what am I going to do after this year? If coach leaves, what do I do? I think that played a massive part in that team underachieving in the postseason. But that's not the case with Will Wade. Will Wade was honest with his players. He told them what's up. They know what's up. Players told him they might want to go somewhere else. And Will Wade not only understood it, he supported them. And the last part of this is the most important thing for smaller schools in 2025 in an NIL era where they get poached left and right. You got to sell yourself as a Power 5 factory. A buddy of mine, a real close friend, is a Division II coach, and he had one of his best freshmen. His best freshman, who was the freshman of the year in their conference, was an all-conference player at the Division II level. They developed him. Nobody else wanted him. They were one of his only offers. And they helped turn him into a really good player. And it takes a lot of work to develop these players. Player development is a grind. And all that work turns into having him for a year in some Division I school taking him. It's frustrating. But I remember telling him when he was venting to me about it that, look, you might have to sell your program as one that can get kids to the Division I level because everybody wants to play at the Division I level. Maybe by selling your school as a school that can get you to the level you want to be, you can play with more success and recruit better than you ever imagined. We'll take a quick break right here. When we come back, Kansas losing to Arkansas last night should be a lesson for the South Carolina Gamecocks. I'll tell you what I mean by that when the postgame show continues. Post-game show rolling right along here, and just a reminder for those who might be tuning in wanting to hear the first round of the women's NCAA tournament between the Gamecocks and the Golden Eagles of Tennessee Tech. A weird Elijah Campbell Bowl of sorts, the school that I cover for a living versus the school that I once flunked out of my first year in college. A lot of personal connections here, so a little different for me than anybody else, but I expect the Gamecocks to steamroll them the same way that my college experience at Tennessee Tech steamrolled me into becoming a better man. But that game is tipping off here in about 25 minutes. It should still be tipping off on time over at Colonial Life Arena now that Indiana has wrapped up their victory against Utah, and Indiana patiently awaits that winner. Feel pretty confident that it's going to be the Gamecocks. You can hear that on 98.5 WOMG. My man Brad Muller on the call. And even if you're just hanging out at work and listening to the radio, might not be a bad idea to swap back and forth between us and my man Brad. He is an A-plus pro on the call right there. But last night, I talked about it from an X's and O's standpoint about Arkansas beating Kansas and John Calipari getting this Hogs team, to his credit, turning a season around. They started 0-5 in SEC play and turned it around, got into the tournament, and did a really good job of beating Kansas last night. But Kansas this season, now that the season is over, and it's another brutal underachievement for Bill Self's bunch, considering that this was the preseason number one team in the country, the number one team in the land. They won the transfer portal. They won high school recruiting. They had a loaded roster that was geared for a deep run in March, right? Nope. They fell short. This Kansas team started the season off really hot. This Kansas team started the season with some really good wins. They won their first 7 games, including one against Duke. They beat Duke on a neutral floor, and that win has aged like fine wine. That was on November 26th. They beat Michigan State in the Champions Classic on November 12th. And Michigan State turned into the best team in the Big Ten, won the Big Ten regular season handily. And this is the best team Tom Izzo's had in a long time. And it's a team that I believe in because I picked them to go to the Final Four. And I feel really confident about that. We all know what Tom Izzo does in March. But this Kansas team beat them. And then they took care of business against North Carolina at home. And North Carolina is a tournament team. But they've underachieved, but still a talented team nonetheless. Those were 3 good wins. 2 of them I consider to be marquee wins before the turn of the calendar from November to December. Since that 7-0 start, Hawks, a crown jewel program in college basketball, went 14-13. They stumbled down the stretch, and they didn't just lose some bad games. They lost some embarrassing games. BYU beat them on February 18th, 91-57. It wasn't close. Never in our lives have we seen a Kansas basketball team get completely outclassed in a Big 12 game. Mind you, this team won, 12-ish regular season titles in a row in the Big 12? And in the last 2 years, after getting Hunter Dickinson, which is one of the higher profile transfers of this era, they were not remotely close to winning the Big 12 conference. And they lost double-digit games in both seasons. So, Elijah, why is this a lesson for South Carolina? The Gamecocks aren't the Jayhawks. South Carolina wasn't coached by a man who literally invented the game of basketball. They don't have the storied tradition of winning national titles and going to countless Final Fours. They don't. But there's a lesson to be learned here that applies to South Carolina. It's one they kind of learned this year too, that when recruiting in the transfer portal, it's about fit and not just talent. I don't want this to be a slight towards Nick Pringle and Jamari Thomas, because those are fantastic young men that will be successful in whatever they do. Thanks for coming out, man. Buddy came by and was watching the show, and coming out to Twin Peaks. Neglect your professional responsibilities and watch some ball with us. But anyway, Jamari and Nick Pringle, I think they'll be successful in whatever careers they get into, and they can maybe even play overseas and make some really good money, or maybe play in the G League and be able to get yourself an opportunity to get onto a roster. You never know. I think those are 2 really smart young men. Those are 2 really awesome dudes, and I've loved talking to them and covering them this season. But it wasn't the best fit. And that's why you saw the offense kind of stagger a lot this year. They stumbled a ton. Defensively, this team was good enough to be better than a bubble team going into the NCAA tournament. But offensively, they were nowhere near close to being good enough to playing in this field and playing in the games that we're watching right now. They just weren't. And that's the reality of it. And it's not that Jamari Thomas and Nick Pringle are bad players. Shoot, Nick Pringle was a key piece on a team that went to the Final Four last year. I firmly believe if Nick Pringle is not an Alabama Crimson Tide last season, they don't go to the Final Four. Jamari Thomas was the MEAC Player of the Year. And you don't do that because you're a bad basketball player. And he was originally committed to VCU in the portal before flipping and playing for the Gamecocks. And you don't play for VCU if you're not a good basketball player. But they weren't maybe the best fit. Replacing Talon Cooper, who is a floor general point guard, a distributor, a real facilitator of the offense, for Jamari Thomas wasn't a skill downgrade, but they're different players. Jamari is a fantastic scorer, and given his size, it's even more impressive to watch him be able to score the ball the way he does. But that's not what Lamont Paris offenses are supposed to look like. Nick Pringle was a screener and rim runner and a rim protector at Alabama in an offense that was wide open and free-flowing and fast-paced. Going to a team that runs a slower-paced offense where he's playing more back to the basket maybe wasn't the best fit for this offense. Fit matters just as much, if not more, than skill. If the pieces don't fit to the puzzle's not complete. And for Kansas this year, they added a ton in the transfer portal. Rylan Griffin, a spot-up three-point shooter at Alabama, who was a key piece to them going to the Final Four. At the time, a fantastic get. Zeke Mayo, a lights-out three-point shooter and three-level scorer at South Dakota State, was a really solid get. And I thought he was up and down this year, but for the most part, you saw a lot of what everybody else saw. Shaquille Moore, a point guard, you brought in presumably to be the backup from Mississippi State and a defensive stopper, had some flashes this year, but never could really get on the floor enough to make a big impact. And he was really a non-factor. A.J. Storr was the leading scorer for a Wisconsin team that was a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. He was one of the best scorers in the Big Ten last year. And he was rendered almost useless for Kansas this year because the fit wasn't right. DeJuan Harris is a good point guard, but if we're being honest with ourselves, DeJuan Harris, not a three-point threat. DeJuan Harris, a point guard who maybe peaked 2 years ago. And since his sophomore year, where I once thought he was the best point guard in America, or one of the 3 or 4, no longer was the best point guard in America, nor was he in that discussion of the 3 or 4 best point guards in America. He regressed. So when he regresses, you need a point guard who can play a similar role to like what Talon did. A facilitator, a floor general, somebody who will create shots for others. Zeke Mayo is a good scorer. A.J. Storr is a good scorer. Rylan Griffin is a great shooter, but they're not creating their own shot. They're not creating shots for others. So the fit wasn't good. Shaquille Moore isn't necessarily a floor general point guard. He was there to play defense. And when he was in the lineup, they were better defensively, but they were worse offensively because he's not a facilitator of the offense, like what you needed necessary to win a Big 12 title. This lesson is the same lesson that the Phoenix Suns have learned, right? When Matt Ishbia bought the Phoenix Suns, the first thing he did was trade away key pieces to their finals appearance team that had Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges, guys that played valuable roles and were really key centerpieces to a team that went to the NBA Finals, traded them away so we can get Kevin Durant, the star. Kevin Durant, the star, does not fit as well in that roster without a true point guard to be able to facilitate everything and all the scoring load be really put onto him, Devin Booker, which are 2 great scorers, and an aging guard in Bradley Beal. It turned out to be a colossal disaster, and they traded away a lot of draft capital and key pieces to do it. It was a failure. The Clippers traded away Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, now before he is what he is now, but was a key young role player on a really good team so they can get Paul George because he's a star. How's that worked out for him? Clippers still, have some hope, but they're nowhere near the team expected to be able to make a run in the NBA. This is the lesson for South Carolina this offseason. When you're portal recruiting, recruit for fit and pieces that fit into your offense, your defense, and your vision for the basketball team, as opposed to maybe just raw talent. And that's one of the reasons why this offseason is so fascinating to me, because the biggest mission is to find the best fit. Tomorrow, Rick Pitino and John Calipari, mano-a-mano in the NCAA tournament. And, baby, this is what college basketball is all about. I'll talk about that to round out hour number 1 here on the Postgame Show. Final segment here of the opening hour of the post-game show. I'm Elijah Campbell, and no Jay Phillips today. He's on dad duty over at Parents Weekend with one of his daughters at the University of Georgia in Athens. My man Jack Veltri is going to join me after this next break, and we'll be talking all types of Gamecock sports, including the recent news of what happened to Zach Davis. He's in the transfer portal, and the Gamecocks are going to have to replace maybe a little more than expected after the season ended. We also talk about this big baseball series happening in Fayetteville, another big test for this Gamecock team. And God, I know it's going to be tough against the top 5 team on the road, but you got to be able to get some of these wins against top-notch competition. Prepare yourself for the season going on down the line. So we'll talk to Jack about that, give you some score updates. Duke right now up all over Mount St. Mary's, 46-22, about 3:53 left in the first half there. And just an observation, I think Cooper Flagg's ankle is A-OK. Vanderbilt and St. Mary's are tied at 11-10 to go in the first half there. So a little low scoring, but Vanderbilt, from what I've been able to look at, has seemingly dictated the tempo fairly well. They have not let St. Mary's completely control the terms and conditions of this game. And lastly, one of the more popular 12/5 upsets picked, and it's one that I picked in my bracket. 12 seed Colorado State leads 5th seeded Memphis 66-58, right under the 7-minute mark to go in that one. So I'll keep you abreast as to what is happening there. Still waiting on tip-off between South Carolina and Tennessee Tech. But before we leave this first hour, I want to get you guys as excited as I am for tomorrow's second-round matchup between St. John's and Arkansas, because we get a coaching matchup that is all-timer. John Calipari and Rick Pitino coached head-to-head in one of the best rivalries in college basketball when they were at Kentucky and Louisville, respectively. Both coaches won titles at those schools. Rick Pitino is one of the more celebrated head coaches in the history of college basketball. He's one of the best coaches in the history of college basketball. He's the only coach to ever take 6 different teams to an NCAA tournament. John Calipari's taken a few teams to the NCAA tournament, and this Arkansas team is the 4th school he has ever taken to the big dance, right outside of UMass, Memphis, and, of course, Kentucky. But these are not just the 2 of the best coaches. These are 2 of the best personalities. These guys wear the fancy suits. They're very boisterous. They're very demonstrative on the sidelines. And these are the personalities that make college basketball so unique. You have a lot of this in college football, too, because the coaching carousel in college football is a world to behold in itself. But sometimes with the intimacy that basketball provides you and the closest to them on the floor and the controlling of the action, sometimes it's the coaches that have the biggest personalities are what is best for the sport. And that's one of my favorite things about college basketball. It's one of the things that drew me in to the sport and it helped me fall in love with it for as long as I have, is coaches like Rick Pitino, whose teams play such a specific style that you could almost not see who's on the sideline. You watch a team play defense, and you could say, that's a Rick Pitino coach team. John Calipari, who changed the sport forever by mastering the one-and-done rule and building teams at a place like Kentucky based off nothing but one-and-done players, building nothing but teams of guys that you know for a year and they're gone to the NBA and being an NBA factory, and him being proud of that and him really changing the sport in his own way. And now what everybody thinks about John Calipari as a coach, especially lately, has varied, and it's dependent on who you ask. But he's still one of the sport's best personalities. He's one of the faces of the sport, and so is Rick Pitino. And the St. John's story is one of the best in college basketball this year because of the massive jump they made from year one to year 2 with Rick Pitino. So seeing those guys square off on the sidelines is going to be something truly special. Hour number 2, my man Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central is going to join me. Whole lot more to get to as hour number 2 of the postgame show kicks off next. Hour number 2 of the Postgame show starts right now. I'm Elijah Campbell, and joining me right now, my man, live from Fayetteville, Arkansas. The man has taken the trip all the way. Long trip. My man, Jack Veltri, live from his hotel room, it looks like. Jack, as always, brother, appreciate you joining me. Appreciate your time. And I'm curious now, how long did it take you to get to Fayetteville, Arkansas?
So what's up, man? I appreciate you having me on as always. But yeah, man, it was a very long trip, as you mentioned. I think it was about a 2.5 hour plane ride. And then, there's no airport in Fayetteville directly, I don't think, because I flew into Bentonville, which is about 30 minutes from here. So in total, I think it's about a 12-hour car ride, but from Columbia, but, about 3 hours of my time. And, very long morning, but glad to be here and settle in now, and looking forward to a very big baseball series this weekend. But happy to be on here and talking with you.
Oh, absolutely. See, now I'm relieved to hear that you didn't have to drive to Arkansas; that you got to fly. So I'm relieved to hear that, because when I was told you're in Arkansas, I was like, man, I really hope Jack didn't have to make that drive, because that thing is a bear to have to make.
If I had to drive, I would not be here. Like, it's quite as simple as that. Flying for this trip and then Texas A&M here in a few weeks. So, but yeah, this is one of those trips that I think you have to fly. Dude, we're right on the border of Louisiana, Texas, and Missouri. It's very, very far.
Oh, absolutely. We'll get into that baseball series here too, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. Now that we're a day and some change into the full field of 64 bracket, how is your bracket doing on the men's side here? Has it been busted yet? Nothing crazy?
Oh, it's totally busted. I think it was busted after the first game. Let me look at my bracket. Honestly, man, I haven't even really gotten a chance to look at my bracket since I made it. I do know there's some games. I think I had UC San Diego going to the Sweet 16, and that did not happen, even though they came close to beating Michigan.
I did too.
But yeah, man, that was tough. Clemson was out. Yeah, Clemson was out in my bracket. Just a lot of misses so far, as my bracket is just taking forever to load. Yeah, it's very, very bad. I'm telling you, man, it's not looking very good. It's rough. I had Yale. That was wrong.
That was a popular one. That was a very popular upset pick.
Dude, very popular. Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that Missouri lost. UNC Wilmington. Yep. Oh man, this bracket is awful.
You banked in on the Seahawks? You banked in on the Seahawks?
No. I didn't. I thought about it, but I'm like, it's Texas Tech, man. I know upsets happen when we least expect it, but man, just wow. Honestly, I haven't even gotten to watch.
I can't pull the trigger on that.
I haven't even gotten to watch a ton, honestly, as I have the women's game on now for South Carolina. But very, very just weird tournament so far. Not a ton of upsets yesterday, but it seems like there's a lot going on now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a little more competitive now. And before we get into baseball, too, speaking of Arkansas and Kansas last night, Arkansas was able to get a win. When we watched Arkansas play on March 1st here at CLA, I could not fathom how this Arkansas team would be able to win a game in the NCAA tournament. And then we saw them almost blow a 22-point lead against Carolina over at Bridgestone Arena. Do you think Arkansas has a chance against St. John's? I was just talking, hyping up the coaching matchup between Rick Pitino and John Calipari. The fact that we get that in the second round is a real treat. But any chance maybe that they might be an upset brewing there, or are you not believing in that hog magic?
Never count out a team like Arkansas in the tournament, because you just never know what can happen. They could easily go on a run here, almost akin to what South Carolina did back in 2017. Going to the Final Four. It's just one of those years where crazy things can happen, and all it takes is one win to get you going. And beating a good Kansas team last night definitely did that. And disappointing season for Kansas also, by the way. Very uncharacteristic of them to go one and done. But Yeah, look, if you get what you had last night, where you're shooting 43% from the field, you didn't win the rebound battle last night, but you're getting some key minutes from Jonas. I do. Trayvon Brazil, like guys like that coming through. You also had Boogie Flan back last night, which he didn't play super well, but getting him back is helping out a lot. So I'm very interested to see how this matchup goes tomorrow between them and the Johnnies. But I do think St. John's is very much capable of going on a deep run here and getting probably to the Final Four if they play their cards right.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And before we even started the show, we had a little bit of breaking news in regards to the South Carolina men's team, and I'm sure you've heard by now too. Joe Tipton from On3 reporting that Zach Davis is in the transfer portal. You hear that, and what does that kind of how does that kind of resonate with you in terms of maybe being surprised or not surprised that Zach Davis is leaving, and how much now this team has to do to backfill the roster, because it looks like it's going to be pretty bare going into next year.
It wasn't a surprise that Zach entered the portal. It's just he didn't really have – I know numbers will say he was better this season than he was last year in terms of he averaged more points per game and all that stuff. But he also just was not consistent at all. There were games where he was pretty good. He would have a 20-point game here and there. But overall, man, I feel like it was just a very very inconsistent to say the least. There was a lot of 1 for 10, 0 for 7 lines mixed in there from the field. And, he's a guy that was very highly recruited by South Carolina coming out of high school, very, thought of prospect. And then, he has the good year as a sophomore where he's South Carolina's best defender. He's a consistent playmaker for the team. He's hitting the occasional shots. And even going into this year, the hype was there in terms of all right, his 3-point shot's better. His shot in general improves during the summer. But when it translates to on-court success, I just feel like we didn't really see it consistently. So I think this is the right time to kind of cut your losses with him and move on. I don't think it's going to get any better for him at South Carolina. Go find a new opportunity elsewhere. You wish him the best, obviously. He's a good dude. But he is one of your starters, but I think you can go out there and find someone better than him in terms of production. And then I think as for the rest of the team, Austin Hero entered the portal yesterday. That was not a surprise by any means. I think we are going to see something. You mentioned the roster becoming bare bones eventually. The only player I would say that should be welcomed back with open arms next season, is Colin Murray Boyles. Now, I don't think he's going to come back because I think he's going to go to the draft. But outside of that, I think no one's spot in this roster should be safe necessarily. Maybe besides a Cam Scott, who you invested so much into.
Yeah, there was a large investment into Cam, and you'd like to see, you'd hate to see him leave only to go somewhere else and end up kind of fulfilling what he was supposed to be coming out of high school. That would certainly feel like a missed opportunity. But for Zach Davis, man, I'm like you. He's one of those guys. He might fit better somewhere else. I hope wherever he goes, it's a role he's satisfied with. But finding, I guess, a player of his archetype should be, I don't want to say easy to do, but doable. It's doable to find a player of that type of, that archetype. And talking about players that when you fill in that spot, you got to find players that fit. And I think that was really the biggest thing this year to me was you maybe didn't fill enough pieces, maybe not like for like in terms of talent, but in terms of fit and their player archetype. When you look around, I know we don't have a complete picture as to what the transfer portal player pool is going to look like, but do you have any sense of maybe there being a change of approach to how they attacked the portal this year compared to last year?
I think it's got to be different. Whatever happened last year in the portal, here's the thing. I think this is the common misconception with last year in the portal. I don't think inherently what South Carolina was doing in terms of strategy was bad. You knew what you needed. Number one, you needed to go get a guard to replace Talon Cooper and Michi Johnson. You found one with Jamari Thomas. He wasn't terrible by any means. Averaging almost 14 points is about what Michi did last year, if I'm not mistaken. It's just the consistent production is just not there. And also, I mean, he gave good effort on defense and stuff, but there were just a lot of games where it was just very, again, inconsistent, I think is the best word to put it, with how the portal class shaked out. Nick Pringle, you were hoping was going to be the guy that is kind of like what you were missing in those big games against like Oregon and Auburn 2 seasons ago, where you just didn't have that big time enforcer outside of CMB who had to play the 5 a lot. You got Pringle. He showed some flashes, but again, very inconsistent and having to kind of learn a new approach to his style of basketball from his time at Alabama to now. I would like to see him come back next year. I know he expresses interest in coming back. He has another year if he wants to use it, but that's one thing compared to like, all right, does Lamont Paris want him back? So yeah, I think they got what they wanted last year in terms of like players. They definitely missed on a few guys, but they got what they needed to fill the roster correctly. It's just this time around, you really have to make sure, with hopefully more money to play with, you can get the guys that you really, really want. Like I'm sure there are guys last year that they just wanted really badly, but they couldn't get. And we saw a lot of guys they missed in the portal. So you hope they can kind of figure it out and get who they want. And hopefully, depending on what CMB does, I mean, that frees up a lot of money that you would have had to use towards him if he goes to the draft. Hopefully you can use that correctly, but it doesn't matter how much money you have. If your evaluations are not correct and you're missing on the guys that you think are going to be great, that's where you kind of fall short.
Yeah, I agree. So I agree as well with the entire sentiment, and it's going to be fascinating to see what they do to maybe address some of those, to address those losses and maybe learn from some of the mistakes of last offseason. But one last thing on the hoops front before we take a break here, Jack. Obviously, this SEC, as good as it's ever been, this is one of the best leagues in the history of college basketball. Any league that gets 14 teams in is a pretty good league, whether or not that last team in was deserving or not. That's a whole other story. But what do you think the SEC needs to do in terms of making enough teams make a run to kind of justify not getting roasted over the coals on social media and publicly when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it needs to be better. Obviously, Texas losing in the first 4 is not ideal, and Missouri losing yesterday or to Drake, and Drake's a good program, but Missouri losing was a little bit of a surprise, honestly. I mean, upsets happen, but you got like I think for the SEC in general, you can't not have a team in the Final Four. You have to have, I think, at least 2 in the Final Four to make it feel warranted. Like, all right, the SEC was legit this year. It'd be like in football if you got 4 or 5 teams to the playoff. Like I know the SEC eventually wants to have auto bids. You get that many teams in, and then they all lose in the first or second round. That would be really, really rough to watch for the SEC. Yeah. So with basketball, if you're not getting a team or 2 to the Final Four, let alone to the national championship, I think that is a real, real letdown. And we'll see. March is crazy, but like the SEC was really, really good this year. And the last thing you want to see is like no teams, even in like, let alone like the Elite 8. That would be really rough.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I mean, that would be worst case scenario for the league and PR disaster for how much they pushed it this year. But we'll go take a quick break. When we come back, we'll time to break down this baseball series. The Gamecocks are in Arkansas taking on an elite Arkansas Razorbacks team and a Razorbacks program. What can we expect from this series? What can we learn about the Gamecocks in a series like this? I'll talk about that with Jack Veltri when the postgame show returns. It's that time again, my friends. 107.5 The Game Spring Golf Classic. This year, we're in partnership with the Lexington County Gamecock Club, so join us on Friday, March 28th. That's a week from today at Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia. You might want to go ahead and call Charwood today so you can sign up and secure your foursome at the number of 803-755-2000. Again, 803-755-2000. And we'll have the par 5 golf ball cannon, which I agree with Jay. It sounds dangerous. And we'll also be giving away a pair of baseball and football season tickets to 2 lucky winners. And my favorite part about this year, special guest, Basketball Hall of Famer and Gamecock legend, Alex English. And still, to this day, I believe, the all-time scorer in the history of the Denver Nuggets franchise. So don't miss out. Call Charwood today at 803-755-2000 to register. My man Jack Veltri is on with me right now. Time to get into this baseball series. And Jack, this team is 1-5 in their 2 biggest series so far. We know what happened in the Clemson series. We know the heartbreaking fashion that they lost against Oklahoma. Really, when it comes down to this series right here, what's maybe one of the more important things to look for that you're looking for with the South Carolina team to be able to give us some confidence in them moving forward in the SEC season?
I think you got to hit. I think it's easy as that. We know what Nathan Hall and Ethan Petcher are doing, that they are solid in South Carolina's lineup, but you need to see more out of other guys in the lineup. I think Henry Kazmar and Jordan Carrion at the bottom of the lineup have been doing pretty well, but you'd like to see them do it more consistently, obviously. It's a very small sample size what Jordan Carrion's done so far, but he's been a nice bottom of the order bat that can get on base consistently. And if he continues to do that through SEC play, he's not letting his job go anytime soon. So you want to see more guys hit. The way they won that Charleston game the other day was just very strange because they hit so poorly in that game. But it's like they were finally disciplined at the plate. They weren't swinging at every single first pitch, which if that happens tonight, we're going to see Arkansas potentially throw complete games like that. Arkansas is a good team that, yes, you want to swing early in the count if you get a good pitch to hit. No one is saying that. But when you're swinging every single time at a 0-1 pitch, 0-2 pitch, you're swinging so early in the count to where it's you can't even see what they're going to throw, right? So that's what we saw for the most of that game against Charleston until that 7th inning where you had the 2 bases loaded walks to bring home a pair of runs, and then you scored a run on a balk to ultimately win the game. So very non-traditional way to win a baseball game, but it happens sometimes, and you just need more out of your offense. It's plain and simple.
Yeah, baseball can be weird like that, can't it? You get a game where you don't even have to hit the ball very well. The other team kind of allows you to be able to score enough to be able to win the game. But looking at this Arkansas team too, Jack, when Terry and I were talking about it on the halftime show earlier today, we just looked at the insane OPS numbers that this hitting lineup has so far this year, how good their top 6 of the order has been. And it's still a legitimate question whether or not they can continue that for the rest of the season. But, Jack, you look at this Arkansas lineup, you already have a really good idea as to what the pitching staff is for South Carolina and what the role is coming into this weekend for these guys. What's kind of your expectation for how this Gamecock team handles a lineup like Arkansas, which has 6 dudes that I believe are hitting about 1,000 OPS and have been really productive so far this year? It's been ironic considering that, Arkansas over the last few years has been all pitching and no hitting. It seems like the hitting has kind of picked itself back up this season.
Yeah, it seems like they finally kind of got the hitting pieces they need to potentially go on a run and win a championship this year under Dave Van Horn. And yes, I think the pitching is probably not I think the pitching's good. Don't get me wrong. But I think the hitting this year is very, very solid. I mean, as a team, Arkansas has almost got 50 homers at the plate. They've almost got 200 RBIs. I mean, they're hitting 322 as a team, and they're very, very good at the plate. I mean, you look at a lot of these slugging numbers. It's just, when you're slugging 588 as a team, that's something really worthwhile to look at. Now, as for how South Carolina kind of handles it, that's a good question. I think this pitching staff is good. This is probably going to be the biggest test they've had so far, and you need length out of your starters, right? Because I think McCoy, Eskew, they haven't provided you much length lately. Like McCoy, I think went 5 innings against Oklahoma last week. Dylan Eskew made it into the 5th inning, but he only got through 4 1/3. And they had to really work for their outs too. I will say that. And the same deal with Brandon Stone. I'm very intrigued to see what he does tonight because, as we know, he had the rough 1st inning last week, and then that kind of like derailed his outing to some extent. It made his stat line look worse than it really was because over the next 4 innings of his outing, he looked sharp. So if these guys can just kind of get through the 1st inning, and then hopefully your offense provides a little bit of a spark, gets you on the board first in this game, it's so massive to score first in these road games, man, because it sets the tone for the
Yeah.
weekend. But you also need good pitching, and I think you have good pitching and good defense to win this series. But if you don't score, you're not going to win many games.
Right. That's gonna be the issue too. Real quick before we continue this discussion, South Carolina up 31-11 on Tennessee Tech. 9.8 seconds to go in the opening quarter, and a lot of stuff that you expected to be happening. South Carolina getting a lot of steals, getting out in transition. Tahina Paopao and Tessa Johnson knocked down their first 2 threes of the game. So far, Tech's on the line right now, but South Carolina rolling, I think, as we expected. And if for anyone wanting to listen to that game, it is on 98.5 WOMG. Brad Muller on the call. So if you're listening right now expecting that game, just tune over to 98.5 and you'll be able to hear Brad bring you all of the action. And before we hit a break here, Jack, I want to ask you about Brandon Stone because that rough 1st inning really set a negative tone in the series opener against Oklahoma. You had a back and forth kind of a discussion with Paul Maneri talking about maybe some of the funkiness that happened before he got onto the mound about maybe not getting enough warm-up pitches in. How much do you think that impacted Brandon Stone, and how much do you think or do you expect from him tonight against a lineup like Arkansas's?
Yeah, I think it definitely impacted him a little bit. And the short synopsis of it, of what Paul had to tell me yesterday, was basically that normally you're supposed to get 2.5 minutes to warm up in between innings, and especially in the top of the first. He only got 2 minutes, and he really wasn't able to mix in any of his off-speed breaking pitches during his warm-up pitches. And that is something that obviously probably threw him off a little bit because the first time he's really throwing off speed is to live hitters, and Oklahoma jumped all over anything Brandon was throwing early on in the 1st inning. So that obviously had an impact on how things looked for him. But it's going to be critical for him to get through this 1st inning. Like I said, if you can just make it a quick, easy 1-2-3 inning. Heck, even getting through a little bit of adversity with 2 guys on and 1 out, and you have to get a double play ball to end the inning, or you get to strike out the next 2 guys. If he can put a 0 on the board in the 1st inning on the road in the SEC when the crowd is really going to be at its peak into it, that's huge. And it's something he definitely needs to do, because if he doesn't, it could be very reminiscent of what we saw last week.
We'll continue this conversation with my man Jack Veltri on the other side, talking about this big baseball series against Arkansas, including do we see a change in role here in the next few weeks with one Jarvis Evans, as well as he's pitched here in the midweek, and maybe some spring football storylines as well. Spring practice is ramping up over here next to Willie B on campus. Some interesting developments for South Carolina. What should we be watching for during spring practice? We'll discuss all of that and more with my man Jack Veltri when the postgame show returns. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways, but a couple of traffic backups, maybe not accident related. We got one, some stop traffic. Doesn't say if it's accident related or not, but on I-26 eastbound between Harbison Boulevard, exit 103, and Piney Grove Road near exit 104, traffic seems to be at a dead stop right there. We also have some major stop and go traffic on 26 westbound between Airport Boulevard at exit 113 and St. Andrews Road near exit 106. An accident has caused a backup on Bush River Road at I-20 as well as Hall Brick Drive at Garners Ferry Road, Hardin Street near Highway 555 and Colonial Drive, I-77 southbound before Killian Road at exit 22, and on US 176 at Broad River Road at I-20. Oh, what we're talking about, myself and my man Jack Veltri, we're talking Gamecock baseball. A very large series this weekend against Arkansas. For those wanting an update, Ole Miss all up on North Carolina right now, 29-16, with a little over 8 minutes and some change to go in the first half there. Duke up on Mount St. Mary's 63-34 with 14 and a half minutes to go in the game, rather. Vanderbilt is up on St. Mary's 29-22. That is a little bit of a surprising result so far. It would be big for the SEC to be able to knock off the St. Mary's team. And right now, another massive Gamecock run over at CLA. It is 40-12 early in the second quarter after Tennessee Tech is forced to call a timeout after an incredible no-look pass from Mylasia Fulwiley to Chloe Kitts down the baseline. Easy catch, easy bucket. It's an easy result so far for the Gamecocks. They are rolling Tennessee Tech right now, and that crowd at CLA is up on their feet. So Jack Veltri with me right now. Jack, ended the last segment talking about maybe the pitching staff, the challenge that lies ahead for them, the importance of maybe getting up early. I know this isn't going to be relating to this weekend, but Jarvis Evans has pitched fantastic out of the midweek. And I know when you do pitch in the midweek, you don't face the SEC bats that you're accustomed to facing. You don't face the Clemson bats, but Jarvis Evans has had a really good outing, a few outings for this team. Jack, is that something that when you watch him pitch, something that you think could translate well to maybe being in the weekend rotation? Or is just Jarvis one of those guys that is we better suited where he's at and taking care of those games that you just can't drop and have used against you on your RPI later on in the season?
Well, I think it's tough to say because just because we don't know how he would pitch against SEC lineups every weekend. And I think that is something we need to see eventually right here. I don't think you can go the whole season without at least trying it out, right? And I think he's pitched well enough to earn a spot in the rotation. The problem is South Carolina has a pretty good pitching staff, and they have Jake McCoy and Dylan Eskew who aren't moving out of the rotation anytime soon. The one guy who potentially could down the road would be Brandon Stone, who pulmonary, as I was talking to him yesterday in media availability. He did mention to me that there is a potential that if he was ever going to move Brandon Stone to the bullpen, it would be because he's best suited out of relief. It would not be because he didn't pitch well as a starter. Jarvis gives you something that not everyone has given you so far this year. He's pitched very well, like most pitchers on this team. He's also given you length. Every time he's gone out there over his last 3 starts this month, he's given you at least 5 good innings. And in some cases, like against Charleston, 6 strong innings, 1 run given up. Mm-hmm. Against, 2 weeks ago against the Citadel, his best outing, 7 innings, 1 run given up. So he's been very consistent, very sharp. And I think at some point he is going to probably move into this rotation. It just feels like his time is coming. And if it doesn't work out, like if he struggles against, let's say he gets thrown in the rotation against Mississippi State here in 2 weeks. If he struggles, all right, let him go another time. And then if he struggles again, you hope he doesn't, but like you move him back into the midweek spot. You just don't want to, I don't know if you really want to mess with his confidence, but at the same time, if you give him a chance to go out there and pitch against SEC lineups and he does pretty well, like he has been, I think it's rewarding to see a guy that takes advantage of his opportunity because he's been very good. And we're going to see what happens against North Carolina here next Tuesday, because if he doesn't pitch on Sunday, like Mineri's been talking about, he'll start on Tuesday. So that's a good team that they'd be facing on Tuesday, and probably the best test he's had so far in a midweek game.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited for that one. I might be as excited for that as I am this Arkansas series. But before we turn the page to spring football, Jack, you look at this matchup, you look at the pitching matchups for both sides, the lineup for South Carolina that's trying to get going, the lineup for Arkansas that has established themselves as world beaters so far to start the season. Where do you see these three games going for Carolina?
I think South Carolina very well could get swept. I'm going to be honest, but I do think they've played well enough. In like you look at the record in these top 10 matchups where they face top 10 teams like Clemson and Oklahoma. Yes, they're 1-5, but a lot of these games have been very competitive. Like South Carolina should have won that series against Oklahoma last week. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Your defense has to be better down the stretch, and you can't be blowing leads. Like that's not going to fly. So I think South Carolina could have won that series. I even think for getting swept against Clemson, I think South Carolina was very competitive in that series because a lot of those games, I think every game was about a one-run game going into the later innings, like the 7th, 8th, 9th inning. It's just you got to be able to find a way to come through. And I think we're going to see a very tough beginning to this series. Tonight really could be one of those games that I just feel like it's going to be tough to win on a Friday night. But the next two games are during the day. A lot of focus for Arkansas fans. Probably going to be on the matchup between Coach Cal and Patino in the NCAA tournament. But those fans are still going to show up, right? I just think South Carolina very well could win a game this weekend, and I think that'd be more than okay. I think they're going to be in this series. I think they drop it, but I do see them winning a game at some point, either Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, and one of the reasons they can do that is if they do get the bullpen to be able to help close out some tight jams. And I lied. There's one more thing I wanted to ask you about as it pertains to baseball. How big of a concern is the bullpen, considering that, like you mentioned, it's a really good point, and Paul's mentioned it, whether it's on with myself and Jay or in post-game press conferences. But the common denominator as to some of the losses that could have been wins were maybe the bullpen letting you down late in games. I think about game 2 of the Clemson series and game 3 of the Clemson series. And then maybe not as much. I mean, it's kind of the fielding error that hurt you in game 3 of the Oklahoma series. But how much of a concern would you say that the bullpen is right now? How much is still to be figured out in terms of those bullpen roles?
I think you have your guys. I think you have your closer with Brendan Sweeney. I think he's good back there. I really like Parker Marlott. I like some of the young guys they have. Like Zach Russell had a little bit of a tough outing the other day. Ryder Guarino's been awesome. Jackson Susie's been nice. So you have some nice pieces in your bullpen. I think Tyler Pitzer's been pretty solid. You have a good bullpen. It's just, you're right. Like there are some times where you just can't get outs in certain situations. I look at Matthew Becker as a guy that really needs to step up this weekend and have a good outing or two out of the bullpen, because what he did against Oklahoma, his first outing was fine. But the second outing where South Carolina's got a 3-1 lead in the 7th inning and he's only able to record, one out? And he gives up the game-tying hit. I mean, that's not going to be good enough here in the SEC. You need some guys in the bullpen to do more, but I also like what they have so far. Again, I don't think the pitching is necessarily the problem with this team. I really do think it is boiled down to the fact of your offense. Like when most of your hits are singles and you're leaving so many runners stranded in scoring position, that's kind of where the problem really is, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. The number of men left on base in the last couple of games, or the season even, is astonishing. I believe it's like 188, I think, is what they've had left on base all year long.
It's awful. It's awful, man. They got to be better with runners in scoring position. The other problem is they're just not hitting. They don't hit for power. That's the thing with them, is that you don't need to hit home runs every single game. But it's like you're not hitting doubles and triples. You're hitting singles and then you're grounding into a double play.
Yeah, that's a big issue as well. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll give you a quick run around of some of the scores in all of March Madness, men's and women's, as well as talk a little spring football. What to watch for this Gamecock football team as spring practice is underway. You're listening to the Postgame Show. Psych! No Jay Phillips today, just Elijah Campbell. And of course, my man Jack Veltri, who's been joining me since the beginning of the 4 o'clock hour. But before we get out of here, too, I want to tell you about Gamecock Traditions over-under contest. I love this one, right? We've had a lot of doozies here in the over-under contest. This one's my favorite so far. This week's over-under, how many of the top 16 seeds in the NCAA men's tournament will advance to the Sweet 16 over-under 11.5? So just seeds 1 through 4. Submit your guess at 1075thegame.com for your chance to win. And as of right now, we do not have a single team, I believe, that's top 4 seed that has lost. Our biggest upsets have been the 12 over 5s. Jack, if you are participating in our contest where you could possibly win some cool Gamecock Traditions gear, if you wanted a chance to win and say you're intrigued and eligible to win, what would you go, over or under 11.5 top 4 seeds to be in the Sweet 16?
Ooh, I think I'd go over. We'll see. Again, it's tough to say, but normally the top 4 seeds are typically like right in the thick of things in March Madness, kind of as the tournament goes on. Like rarely do you see like a Loyola Chicago go to like the Final Four. You know what I mean? So there'll be a few sleepers in there for sure, but most in cases, I think it's going to be the top 4 seeds in there.
Yeah, I think so. I'll go over. I think a couple might get picked off tomorrow, but I don't think any get picked off today, especially Maryland. I love this Maryland team. They just tipped off against Grand Canyon right now. They still got donuts on the board right now. But, Jack, before we get you out, got to squeeze in some spring football talk here. And, there, not a ton of storylines because the position battles don't really get shifted until, quote-unquote fall practice. But with this team right now, one thing I'm really interested in is the back end of the defense, the secondary, right? I think there is maybe some role assimilation that can be figured out here in these spring weeks. And, like, where's the best place for Jalen Kilgore moving over? What's the best replacement for Nick Emenwari at his position? You got 2 studs coming in from the transfer portal and Brandon Cisse and Miles Norwood. How are you expecting in this spring for that secondary to kind of shape out the closer we get to the season and maybe how we see them aligned for that first game against Virginia Tech in August?
Yeah, well, I think the secondary is like one of those positions where I actually think, like, yes, you're losing Nicky Minwari, obviously, and O'Donnell Fortune, but, like, other than that, man, I feel like you have a lot of key pieces coming back. Like, getting Jalen Kilgore back for year 3, and I think this is – I mean, if he has another good year here, I think he's going to go to the draft. I mean, he's a solid DB. You have DQ Smith, who obviously has had an up-and-down career, but I think he has been a nice little mainstay out in the safety position alongside Nicky Minwari in the secondary. And you got some new guys coming in. You mentioned Cisse. What's a guy like Miles Norwood going to do transferring over? What are some of the young guys going to do that you brought in looking like? So the secondary is one of those spots that, like, yes, you lose a lot of key guys like Nick and OD, but what you're returning, it could be worse in a lot of ways, honestly.
Yeah, and that's what I like about the secondary is, like, there's questions about, like, maybe who plays where and who's best in what spot, nickel corner, boundary corner, free safety. Like, there's some maybe those question marks. Those aren't question marks where it's like, oh, I'm really concerned about this defense going into the 2025 season, or at least the secondary. I think that's going to be a strength of this defense, and that's something that maybe doesn't take a massive dip from last year to this year. Another thing, too, the interior defensive line, I think, is going to be a very interesting position battle. I love the potential of Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy. I love talking to him. Getting to talk to that guy was a real treat. But you look at this interior defensive line with so much that was lost this year, Jack. Who's maybe a guy that you've heard in these early days of practices or from the people that you've talked to might surprise us and end up being a real competitor to get a full-time spot there on that interior D-line?
I really want to see what someone like Xavion Hardy kind of does, right? He's an interesting dude because, like, again, he comes from JUCO and stuff. He doesn't have the SEC experience, which might lead to him being a guy that I think kind of maybe has a little bit more time to develop and stuff. That's why the spring is so important for these guys, because you're not out there practicing every single day. You're getting to learn from your mistakes and stuff, watching film, and then going back out there and practicing again. It's very different now compared to what the regular season is going to be like. And for so much of the talent that they're losing, I feel like Xavion's a guy that could really come in and be maybe not immediately right off the jump in week one, but as the year goes on, I feel like he's a guy that if he gets enough reps and enough time out there to get comfortable in this league, he could be someone by year's end that's like we're talking about is like, all right, going into 2026, he's going to be a stud for this team. So we'll see what happens, but definitely a guy to keep an eye on.
That is a really good one. I don't want to say a forgotten guy, but sometimes the JUCO guys can be a little lost in the shuffle because we all talk so much about the transfer portal and its importance. Last thing on the football front, because we got about a minute for you here, Jack. Air Noland, locked up QB2. How do you see that one going?
I think Air probably is your QB2. Although, when we were at practice the other day, Luke Doty was in a green quarterback jersey. So I know he's obviously still listed as an athlete and a receiver and whatnot, but he's someone that I think definitely could give Air a little bit of a run for his money. What's Dante Reno going to look like? But I think Air is definitely your QB2 moving forward.
I think so too. Jack Veltri, Gamecock Central at Jack T. Veltri on the Bird app. Jack, thanks as always for joining me, brother.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Always good talking with you.
Fine. Next. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. A few accidents and traffic backups to report to you that are causing some issues on the roadway, starting with some stopped traffic over on I-26 eastbound between Harbison Boulevard at exit 103 and Piney Grove Road at exit 104. That one's been at a standstill now for about 30 minutes or so, so avoid that if possible. We also have an accident that's caused some issues on Assembly Street near Calhoun Street, Burning Tree Drive near St. Andrews Road, 2 on Bush River Road, 1 at I-26, the other at I-20, Hampton Street near Hugh G. Street here downtown, Highway 19, Whiskey Road between Powell Pond Road and I-20, and then 1 on US 176 at Broad River Road at I-20. Ah, yes. What better way to kick off the final hour of Friday's show and get you ready for the weekend than to catch you up on the goings-on in March Madness, because the 5 o'clock news today, my friends, it is March Madness heavy. Day 2 in the men's tournament in regards to the field of 64. Day 1 for the women's tournament in regards to the field of 64. And we'll get you the local first because Tennessee Tech is bravely having to play the South Carolina Gamecocks, and the Gamecocks are all on them at halftime. After 1, South Carolina leads Tennessee Tech 60-27. You can hear that game on 98.5 WOMG. Brad Muller, as always, on the call in that one. And the funny thing about this South Carolina team that we love seeing is how good this bench is, and the bench is at it again. Many times this year, the South Carolina bench, even in SEC play, has outscored the entire opponent, and that's the same way so far at halftime. I told you the score was 60-27 at the break, and in terms of Carolina's bench against Tennessee Tech's whole roster, the South Carolina bench unit leads 29-27, fueled by 14 points from Joyce Edwards. She is on fire right now. 14 points, 4 rebounds, a pair of assists, and a pair of steals. She is the leading scorer for the Gamecocks. Off the bench as well, Mylasia Fulwiley has 7 points, and she's got 3 blocks. Talk about a defensive stopper, man. She is great on the ball, but her ability to be able to track somebody down from behind and swat shots out of the air is second to none. 3 blocks, again, here in the first half. Tessa Johnson, totally read that backwards. Tessa Johnson has 8 points off the bench. So the 8 from Tessa, the 7 from Mylasia, and the 14 from Joyce adds up to 29 bench points. And Tennessee Tech only has 27 for their entire team. The starting unit also giving some pretty good minutes as well. Raven Johnson with 8 points. She's not really been as much of a scorer down the stretch, especially in the SEC tournament. But the beauty of Raven's game is she doesn't need to be a scorer to be ultimately her most effective. But today she's been able to pitch an 8 in the first half on 2 of 2 from 3, 3 of 4 from the field. And then, of course, she does all the little things that make winning possible. She's got 4 rebounds. She has an assist, and she has 2 steals as well. The Gamecocks have forced 10 turnovers for Tennessee Tech. Tennessee Tech only has 10 made field goals. So a pretty dominant performance so far. Chloe Kitts has 8, and Tahina Paopao has 6. She's 2 of 2 from 3. Now, the one thing with the South Carolina team, they didn't shoot particularly well from three-point range in Greenville. Well, I think that three-point bug is now out of their system because they are 7 of 10 in the first half of this game. They are making it rain from beyond the arc over at Colonial Life Arena. We'll keep you updated to everything going on at CLA. And again, if you tuned in to 107.5 The Game and you're hearing the post-game show and you said, wait, I thought the game's on the radio. It is. It's just on 98.5 WOMG, our sister station. Brad Muller, as always, on the call there. Who's South Carolina going to play if they continue to seal the deal here? Well, we had that answered for us. The first game of the day, Indiana took down Utah. 9 seed Indiana wins 76-68, a really tight game. It was tied at the end of the first quarter. It was tied at half. but Indiana used a 27-16 third quarter push to be able to get themselves a little bit of a lead, and they ultimately would not give that up at the end of the game. So once South Carolina, runs the clock out, seals the deal in the game at CLA right now, they will take on Indiana on Sunday. The time for that still TBD. Indiana, though, had a lot of really good scoring balance. They had 5 players scoring double figures. Lily Meister had 11. Shea Suzuki, I definitely botched the pronunciation of that, but Shea went for 16. Chloe Moore McNeil had 12. Caroline Striplin had 10, and the leading scorer for the Hoosiers, Yarden Garzon, with 17 points to go along with her 3 assists and 7 rebounds. So Indiana out of the Big Ten, a team that the Gamecocks played last season in the Sweet 16 and got really an incredible push at the end of the game. If you guys don't remember, in the Sweet 16 last year, South Carolina led by a ton, and ultimately Indiana made them sweat it out a little bit into being a single-digit game. Don't think they're going to have that much trouble this year because Mackenzie Holmes ain't walking through that door, to quote Rick Pitino, who got a big win last night. It's still a team, though, that was really successful in the Big Ten. I alluded to it in the first segment of the show. This Indiana team has played some really good teams this season and has pushed them to the brink, right? They have some interesting results. The UCLA only ended up winning by 11. That was a close game for a while. Southern Cal at home, until Juju Watkins did what Juju Watkins does, and that's take over games. They held a lead for most of that game and only ended up losing 73-66, so a short 7-point loss there. And a couple of mixed results up and down the board, but beat a good Ohio State team at home by 10 points and hung around with a good Michigan State team on the road, only ended up losing by 8. So more than likely, South Carolina versus Indiana in round 2 on Sunday. On the men's side, Duke is 54 seconds away from sealing the deal against Mount St. Mary's. They're up 91-47, and you don't have to watch the game for more than a few minutes to know that, or to at least make the observation that Cooper Flagg's ankle, his left ankle that he injured in the ACC tournament against Georgia Tech, is A-okay. He was able to play in this game, and I think just the fact that he played in this game should tell you all you need to know about the status of his ankle, because in a game against a 16 seed, the way Duke played without Cooper Flagg in the ACC tournament, beating North Carolina and then beating Louisville pretty handily in the second half of the ACC title game, you could figure that they probably don't need Cooper Flagg to win this game, but he was healthy enough to play anyway. And the fact that he's healthy enough to play and they got him out there tells me that they believe his ankle's pretty good. So that should put really an end to the speculation as to whether or not Cooper Flagg's ankle would be something that keeps Duke from winning it all. Right now, a game that tipped off not too long ago, the Terrapins of Maryland taking on Grand Canyon, coached by Bryce Drew. Maryland's up 13-8, just got on an 11-1 run over about the last 3 minutes and 45 seconds of game time. The Lopes are a good team, but not really high to be picked as a team that would upset Maryland. They were a trendy upset pick last year. They returned a lot of players on that Grand Canyon team, but Maryland, I think, is just too strong. The Crab Five is one of the best starting units in all of college basketball. Grand Canyon just scored, and that cut it down to 13-10, but still a lot of hoop to be played in that one. One of the bigger surprises isn't necessarily that Ole Miss is winning. It's how much they're winning by. It's halftime in that game over, I don't think that one's in Raleigh. I can't remember where that one's being played right now, but Ole Miss beating North Carolina 44-26 at the break. An absolute beatdown in the first half by the Rebels. North Carolina, after really putting San Diego State in a blender on Tuesday, was a popular pick to be able to pull off, or on Wednesday rather, pull off an upset in this game, but not so much. Ole Miss is just coming out of the gates firing. Ole Miss is a dangerous team, man. They kind of got lost in the shuffle in what was a really loaded SEC this year. They beat Alabama at Alabama, had a tough, close loss to Auburn at home. They got clubbed by Auburn on the road, but this is an Ole Miss team that still has really high ceiling. Chris Beard is a fantastic tournament coach. It does not surprise me that Ole Miss is winning the game, but I am a little surprised to see them dominating the way they are. In other SEC news as well, Vanderbilt taking on St. Mary's. This one's getting interesting now because Vanderbilt was up by as much as 12. They opened up a 39-27 lead early in the second half, But slowly, like St. Mary's does, this is a team that plays methodical basketball, kind of like what we saw with Drake last night. Slowly getting back into this game, they just had a Mitchell Saxon layup that cut Vanderbilt's lead to 4. It's 42-38. Mitchell Saxon just got a defensive rebound. So now St. Mary's has the ball with 10:45 left to play, down only 4. So that one's on True TV right now. If you're looking for a tightly contested basketball game to watch, look no further, because now St. Mary's just cut it to 2. So buckle up. That one can be really exciting. That's something to monitor moving forward. Earlier in the day, we have some other results from the men's side. Some exciting games. Baylor, Mississippi State was an absolute thriller. That one ended up coming down to the wire, back and forth for a lot of that game. Pulling up the score right here just so I don't mess that up for you. But Baylor did end up coming out on top with a 75-72 win. Josh Hubbard had a A-plus Josh Hubbard game. He ended up giving the Bulldogs 26 points, but it was not enough. Rob Wright for Baylor was really a big difference maker. He had a lot of big buckets down the stretch, some big free throws to help put the game on ice. Baylor wins by 3, 75-72. They will take on Duke in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Not saying Baylor's going to beat Duke. I picked Duke to win the national championship, and I still feel incredible about that pick. But Baylor has a lot of talent, a lot of upside. Maybe they can hang with the Blue Devils for a half or so. So Baylor win over Mississippi State. One of the more recent finals, Colorado State, one of the trendier 12-over-5 upset picks across America. It was one that I absolutely loved. I took Colorado State to win the game, and they did end up winning. It was Memphis, not dominated, but Memphis controlled the game for the first half. They took a 5-point lead to the break, but Colorado State went on a big run in the middle of that second half, ended up outscoring the Tigers 47-34. In the second half, Colorado State wins by a score of 78-70. So we have our second 12-over-5 upset of the tournament. Of course, as we all know, McNeese State clobbered Clemson in the first round. Clemson made a ferocious comeback attempt in the second half, but fell just 2 points short. So McNeese State got the 12-over-5 upset win yesterday. Colorado State gets the 12-over-5 upset of Memphis today by a score of 78-70. 14-over-3 that I know my man Terry Ford was interested in seeing, thinking it might be a close game because Lipscomb runs some incredible offense. They took on Iowa State without Keyshawn Gilbert, but no Keyshawn Gilbert, no problem for the Cyclones. Iowa State wins that one going away. They had a massive 16-point lead at the break. They kept it pouring on in the second half. They win by a score of 82-55 in what is a resounding win for the Cyclones, and answered a lot of questions as to what this team might look like without Keyshawn Gilbert. Yes, Lipscomb defensively, not very good. As somebody who watches a lot of mid-major basketball, watched a lot of Lipscomb this year because I love how their offense operates. I love exactly how well they shoot the ball. One of the better shooting teams in the entire sport. Iowa State did a hell of a job of shutting them down today and also taking advantage of maybe the lack of defensive prowess for the Bisons. Iowa State's Joshua Jefferson, a St. Mary's transfer, has 10 points, but 8 rebounds and 8 assists for the big man. He helped carry the load offensively while Iowa State was able to run away with it in that game. And then the other final from today, Alabama ends up beating Robert Morris 90-81, and it was a 9-point finish, but it was a lot closer than that 9 points might indicate. Alabama only took a 4-point lead going into the break, and for most of the second half, and I would say a majority of the second half, Robert Morris kept it within 2 to 5 points the entire time. They wouldn't go away. The biggest surprise from that game was Robert Morris's ability to be able to crash the offensive glass. And if you're a team that's looking to make a major upset in the NCAA tournament, one of those big keys to pulling off an upset is being able to control the offensive glass and to be able to create second chances when your shot's not falling. And Robert Morris had 16 offensive rebounds in this game, 6 from Marion Dickerson, who ended up also scoring 25 points in the game. Robert Morris didn't necessarily shoot the lights out from 3, but they didn't have to because they grabbed so many rebounds, a lot of second chance opportunities, didn't turn the ball over a lot, but at the end of the day, it was not enough to beat Alabama. Grant Nelson, who was going to sit out the game for Alabama initially to try to give him some rest, ended up coming back into the game, playing 7 minutes, but it was so close towards the end of the game that I think Nate Oates kind of panic subbed and brought Grant Nelson in just so we can try to close this thing out. He did 5 points for him in 7 minutes of play, along with 3 rebounds and a ferocious dunk that was used as the ultimate silencer. We'll give you more scores from around the world of college basketball, some updates of how intriguing St. Mary's and Vanderbilt has gotten. They have just tied the game up at 43 with 7.5 minutes left. But then we'll also, in the next segment, go a little deeper on the second round matchup for the Gamecocks, give you an update with them because their third quarter has started, and a whole lot more when the postgame show continues. All right, leading into the big weekend series for the Gamecocks baseball team against Arkansas, we still have our Grand Slam giveaway, the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Still a good way for you to potentially win you some money. Of course, if a Gamecocks batter hits a Grand Slam, you could win cash, and the pot goes up $25 every game. So don't forget to go to 1075thegame.com to register. And then, of course, because we're a week away now, I have to remind you that it is indeed that time again, the 1075 The Game Spring Golf Classic. This year, we are in partnership with the Lexington County Gamecock Club. So join us Friday, March 28th at Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia. Call Charwood today. Sign up, secure your foursome at 803-755-2000. We'll have the par 5 golf ball cannon, which sounds dangerous if put into the wrong hands. And whenever I show up, you bet I'm going to try to get my filthy mittens on that thing to try to see how far I can launch a golf ball, and maybe if I can end up hitting Jay Phillips. You never know. I might be able to. We'll see how good my accuracy is. I talk a big game. We'll see if I can play one. But they'll also be giving away a pair of baseball and football season tickets to 2 lucky winners. And my favorite part about the whole event, the special guest, Basketball Hall of Famer, former Gamecock legend, and current all-time leading scorer for the Denver Nuggets. That would be Columbia's own Alex English. So don't miss out on this. Call Charwood today, 803-755-2000 to register. Right now, the Gamecocks are absolutely rolling. Maddie McDaniel on an inbounds pass just throws a little lob to Adele Tack, and Adele catches the ball smoothly, puts the ball up and in. So Adele Tack. Sometimes I get to speaking too fast and I mess stuff up. But Tack gets on the board. It is Tack time at CLA. And it is a runaway for the Gamecocks right now. An absolute beat down. The score right now as I think we're in the 4th quarter. I've been looking back and forth at all these TVs. Sometimes it's so hard to keep up. 2:13 left in the 3rd. South Carolina leads Tennessee Tech 79-34. And, of course, like we mentioned earlier in the show, Indiana takes down Utah. So that sets up a showdown Sunday, over at CLA between South Carolina and the Indiana Hoosiers. So let's take a look at this Indiana team, 20-12 overall on the season, but very battle-tested, 10-8 in what is a really good Big Ten conference. I know the SEC gets a lot of the headlines because, quite frankly, 2 of the best teams in the country hail in the SEC. And then, of course, you can never count out what Kim Mulkey and LSU does on a year-to-year basis. Kentucky's had a fantastic year. Oklahoma is so much fun to watch. And Tennessee is a funky wild card in this whole thing, too. But the Big Ten has a lot of depth, too. They also a conference with 2 of the best teams in America with UCLA and Southern Cal. A couple of dark horse contenders, kind of like what the SEC has. But this comes in the form of Ohio State and Michigan State and Maryland, who anytime Brenda Freese is coaching a Maryland Terps basketball team, that team is dangerous. But Indiana, a 9 seed coming in, has a couple of things that really pop out on paper when you look at them. They're a top 25 defensive unit in the sport. Most of that comes from their ability to keep teams off the glass. And when previewing this matchup, I think one of the things to consider most in terms of what South Carolina is going to have an issue with is maybe grabbing offensive rebounds, because this is a top 20 defensive rebounding team in all of college basketball. Their opponents only grab about a 1/4 of those second chances. And one reason I think I like South Carolina to win this one going away, outside of this, the depth and the talent discrepancy between Carolina and Indiana, is that as much as Indiana relies defensively on being able to grab boards and get second or keep your opponent from second chances, I don't see them keeping Sanaya Fagan off the glass. I don't see them keeping Joyce Edwards off the glass. I don't see this team keeping Chloe Kitts off the glass. And I think that South Carolina is going to be able to do that enough to where even if they don't have a good shooting day, which is obviously not the case today because the Gamecocks are absolutely shooting the lights out over at CLA, it's going to end up looking like no one paid the electric bill because all the shots are going to take all those lights out. Right now, they're 9 of 14 from three-point range. But let's just say the three-point shot doesn't fall, which has happened for this Gamecock team a few times this season. I still like their ability to grab defense or offensive rebounds and create second chances because they're going to be at a little bit of a size advantage on this Indiana team as well. Offensively, Indiana, top 40 offensive unit. again, playing against the South Carolina defense that is the number one defensive unit in the country. South Carolina defense that forces a ton of turnovers, puts tremendous pressure on the basketball. That ball pressure is going to be key because one thing that Indiana does very well is spread it around. They are top 20 in assist rate, 16th specifically in assist rate, and they do move the ball really well because they're a really well-coached team. And I don't want to disparage this Indiana team too much, but I don't love their matchup against South Carolina. I think the Gamecocks should win by double figures, especially considering one thing that I talk about all the time. That is a perfect recipe for an underdog to pull off an upset is you have to be good on the offensive glass. It's the reason that I think Troy is going to give Kentucky on the men's side a hell of a game today, and that's one of the reasons why I picked them as my big upset is because Troy does crash the glass so well. This Indiana team does not. There are only 364 teams in Division I. This Indiana team ranks 350th in offensive rebound percentage. You got to be able to give yourself an insurance policy for whatever your shots don't fall against South Carolina. Ask Texas. Ask Texas how hard it is to shoot efficiently against this Gamecock offense. Madison Booker shot less than 30% in the 3 games against South Carolina, and she's one of the best scorers in America. They're going to struggle shooting the ball. Barring a miracle or some type of divine intervention, Indiana's going to have a hard time scoring efficiently. And when you have a hard time doing that, you're going to have to be able to rely on getting second chances. They haven't had to do that because Indiana is top 25 in effective field goal shooting this year, 24 to be exact. But those shots that you're getting at South Carolina aren't the same ones that you're getting against Michigan State. They're not the same shots that you're getting against Ohio State or Northwestern or a lot of the teams that Indiana has played this season. They're going to be tough contested looks. And I don't see them shooting the lights out at Colonial Life Arena on Sunday. And if they're not going to grab second chances, man, I don't see how Indiana really contends in this game. So from a matchup perspective, from a basketball on paper perspective, this should be a pretty good South Carolina win. And South Carolina, of course, right now doing everything they can to embarrass Tennessee Tech. That one just went to the end of the third quarter, so we have one more quarter to play. South Carolina up 85-37, so up by 48 points. Can't remember what the point spread was, but whatever it is, South Carolina is going to cover it pretty easily. So it looks like it is all Gamecocks there. And then looking at the rest of the bracket, a couple of games that have yet to start. Alabama takes on Green Bay tomorrow at 1:30 on ESPN2. I don't see Green Bay pulling off that upset. Alabama's just too good on offense, and I think Maryland takes care of Norfolk State after that. In my bracket, I have Maryland beating Alabama and then Maryland meeting South Carolina in the Sweet 16. Don't really think Maryland or Alabama is a good matchup for South Carolina. We know what South Carolina can do against Alabama. They took care of business at Coleman Coliseum when they played earlier this season. If they meet again, I think we're going to have a very similar result. But Don's team is rolling right now. I know it's Tennessee Tech, but they are playing like they have that chip on their shoulder from not being the number 1 overall seed. And as much as I think South Carolina deserved the number 1 overall seed compared to UCLA, despite the regular season head-to-head, that South Carolina resume was just too good to ignore. It's still the best resume in the country, and I'm a firm believer that the best resume in the country should be the number 1 overall seed. Nevertheless, we're in the position we are right now. South Carolina is clearly making the best of it. And honestly, I agree with David Cloninger assessment when he was on with Jay and myself earlier in the week that even though the Gamecocks did not get the number 1 overall seed, they got a more favorable draw because I believe NC State and LSU are significantly better of a 2-3 seeding pairing than what Duke and North Carolina are. I think Duke's better than NC State, and they proved it whenever they beat them for the ACC crown just a couple of weeks ago. But I would not want to be in a bracket with NC State, especially with the familiarity of seeing them last year, and I wouldn't want to be in a bracket with LSU. If I got to choose, I would take Duke and North Carolina and seeing where it all rolls from there. We'll come back from the break, give you some more score updates because this St. Mary's Vanderbilt game, brother, it is down to the wire. We'll discuss the SEC's showing so far in the NCAA men's basketball tournament and how they're doing on the women's side because there is one SEC favorite that got a mighty good scare in the early slate on the women's side. I'll tell you who that is and whether or not they survived when the postgame show returns. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to, they're causing some issues on the roadways, including some major traffic backups that might not be accident related because we do have some stop traffic. It's not specified as to whether or not it's accident related on I-26 eastbound between Harbison Boulevard, exit 103, and Piney Grove Road near exit 104. That one for about an hour has been standstill right now, completely stopped. Avoid that if you can. Doesn't look pretty over there. We have an accident that's got 2 left lanes blocked on 26 westbound at St. Andrews Road near exit 106. Some other more minor accidents causing more minor traffic backups on Assembly Street near Calhoun Street, Burning Tree Drive near St. Andrews Road, Bush River Road at I-26, Bush River Road near I-20, Dutch Fork Road, Highway 76 near US 176 and Broad River Road, Gervais Street near Millwood Avenue downtown, Hampton Street near Hugie Street, and St. Andrews Road at Piney Grove Road. All right. Man, I got to take a breather for myself, not just from reading that long traffic report, but we got a thriller in St. Mary's and Vanderbilt. St. Mary's, after trailing by as much as 12 in the second half, came back, took a 6-point lead. Vanderbilt hits a 3 with less than a minute left, trying to get a stop to give themselves a chance to get a shot to take the lead or tie it up. St. Mary's misses a 3, and on the rebound attempt, Mitchell Saxon, one of the best offensive rebounders in the nation, if not the best, grabs the offensive rebound but gets pulled down to the floor. He's shooting 2 free throws, 27 seconds left, and he bricks the first one. So if he misses right here, Vanderbilt's got a good chance to tie or take the lead, but I'll keep you updated on that one as there's 27.7 seconds left. Ole Miss having no trouble with North Carolina right now. They were up by as much as 20 at one point. North Carolina just got an and one. Looks like from Seth Trimble. He's going to shoot a free throw with a chance to cut it to 15. It's 56-40. Ole Miss. Mitchell Saxon hits the second free throw for St. Mary's. So they have a 3-point lead at 27.7 seconds left. And then, of course, the update. If you came to the station wanting to hear South Carolina, Tennessee Tech, I once again say that is over on 98.5 WOMG. Brad Muller on the call as the Gamecocks try to put the finishing touches on a dominant win. They're up 93-41 with 6:18 remaining. And again, they'll be moving on to play Indiana on Sunday. But for the drive around the SEC, it's time for us to take a look at how the conference has fared so far in the NCAA tournament. Jay Phillips posed a question to me earlier in the week. How many SEC teams need to get to the Sweet 16 for it to be considered a success? And I said it needs to be 6 because that's the seed expectation. There are 6 teams that are in the top 4, or in the top 4 seeds in the tournament. And when you are looking at just normal seed expectation, if you're a top 4 seed, you absolutely should get to the Sweet 16. That's a must. You have to get to the Sweet 16 to be able to fulfill your seed expectation. And for the SEC, that means there's got to be 6. Missouri fell short of that last night, but they were not a top 4 seed. They were the 6th. They got beat by Drake in a game where I felt like Dennis Gates got completely outcoached, completely outclassed, outcoached in every way, shape, or form, as the bar here at Twin Peaks, which I highly suggest coming out to with all the TVs and all the great food selection here, erupts when Elijah Fulwiley hits a 3. But Dennis Gates got completely outcoached last night by Drake's Ben McCollum. They fall a little early, so that's an L that the SEC has taken already. Texas losing to Xavier is a little bit disappointing for the league, but even though Texas is clearly the weakest team that made it in, and I mean, a fair debate as to whether or not they should have been in this field at all, I think is legitimate. I would not have put them in, but they end up losing to Xavier. So that's 2 teams, still 12 left. Right now, Vanderbilt has a 3 for the tie, missed it. They have the offensive rebound. A 3-pointer again with 3 seconds left is no good. And St. Mary's gets the rebound. They win by 3. So the 3rd SEC team has been eliminated. St. Mary's escapes with a 59-56 win over the Commodores. So they'll move on to play Alabama in the second round. But you look at it tonight, a couple of SEC teams in action. Florida takes on Norfolk State. at 6:50 on TNT. That should be no problem. Kentucky and Troy at 7:10 on CBS. I've loved Kentucky all year long. I love what they do on offense. I think their zoom action offense and continuity offense is one of the hardest in all of college basketball to guard. But Troy's got a solid defense. They're an elite offensive rebounding team. They've got athletes all over the floor. And Lamont Butler's going to play, I feel like. I believe that he's going to give it a go. But this is a guy that is Kentucky's only real ball stopper on defense at the guard position. And they have been really weak when he's not on the floor. Defensively, they are really bad when he's not on the floor. They've been really good defensively when he does play. But here's the thing with Lamont Butler's injury. He hurt his shoulder at the SEC tournament, the same shoulder that he injured that kept him out of some time in the regular season. And when you re-injure that previous injury, the risk of further re-injury is always there. And I get it right now. It's the NCAA tournament. You go all in. You play because you have no other choice. If you can stand the pain, you go out there and you play. And Lamont Butler, I believe, is going to tough it out tonight. But I believe he's not going to be 100%. I don't think he's even going to be 50% with that shoulder. And who knows how much time he's getting to get into play tonight. If he doesn't play a lot, I'm not going to be too surprised to see Troy pull off that upset. But in order for the SEC to be able to fulfill seed expectations, they're going to need Kentucky to win this game and win against the winner of Illinois and Xavier tonight as well. That game is at 9:45, so that's one of the late ones. But today we've had a couple of SEC results already. Mississippi State went down, so I guess technically that's the fourth SEC team. Hard to keep up with so many teams in this dang tournament. But Mississippi State fell as well, so that's 4 SEC teams that have fallen before the second round. And I guess with my math, that leaves 10. But they fell. Alabama took care of business late, but it took a while for them to take care of business. They beat Robert Morris, and there were some real, I guess, kind of cracks in the foundation there for the Crimson Tide. That's a team that's a really good rebounding team, and Robert Morris dominated the offensive glass in that game, and that really kept them in it. My concern for Alabama may be Grant Nelson's availability. He had to get Panic subbed in late in the game, played 7 minutes, was really productive. But if Grant Nelson's not 100%, I think you can see Alabama losing a little prematurely. Just looking at the bracket right now as to where things stand, Alabama's got to play St. Mary's on Sunday. That's a tough game. That's a really tough draw because St. Mary's is the opposite of Alabama. They slow the game down, play at a snail's pace. They want to do to you what Drake did to Missouri last night. Make this a 60 possession or less basketball game, crash the offensive glass. St. Mary's every year under Randy Bennett has a team that plays slow and is one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country. You're going to have to be a good offensive rebounding team against Alabama. Robert Morris showed that the pathway to be able to hang in the game with Alabama is to be really great on the offensive boards. And St. Mary's is one of the best in the country. I want to pull up their KenPom page right now to see if they are the number one for a while. Not the number one, A&M is, but that's a team that every year is usually top 10, top 20 in terms of offensive rebound. This year, they're number 2. So St. Mary's is one of the 2 teams in the country that grabs over 40% of their misses. So that's a tough draw for Alabama. There's no guarantee they get to the Sweet 16. And if St. Mary's pulls off that upset on Sunday, then there's a really good chance that the SEC does not fulfill the expectation set out for them to get 6 teams into the Sweet 16. I still like Tennessee's chances to beat UCLA. I don't think UCLA is just going to be able to muster enough points against this defense. I could be wrong. If that game's in the 40s or 50s, Tennessee is in trouble because they'll be sweating it out. So just taking a look right now at the field, the SEC teams that are still in it, it's interesting to look at to see if they fulfill that baseline expectation, because in a year in which you've been touted as the best conference in the history of the sport, really, it would be disappointing to have a bad showing in the NCAA tournament. And as of right now, Vanderbilt has been knocked off, Mississippi State has been knocked off, Missouri has been knocked off, and so has Texas. We'll take a quick break, and we'll wrap up today's show live from Twin Peaks. Postgame show wrapping up, coming next. All right, final segment of a busy Friday show of the Postgame show. Live from Twin Peaks. We'll be wrapping up here real soon, but that does not mean the fun has to stop here because there's games on all night between the men's NCAA tournament, the women's NCAA tournament. We have some bangers for games, some cold beverages, and some really good food. I had the flatbread yesterday, the jalapeno flatbread, and I think the only way I could describe that was heavenly eating experience. So you got nothing to do tonight. You want to watch some quality basketball? May I suggest coming by Twin Peaks? All types of TVs, and they've got a good assortment. I'm even looking at some spring training baseball right now. And I know my man Troy, who joins us on the YouTube comment stream, a fellow Reds fan. They were taking on the Mariners earlier today. I don't know if they end up winning that a lot, but I am very intrigued with how that team's looking this year. I'm excited. Major League Baseball season, real opening day, not too far away, and that hope for your boy springs eternal. Interesting question, or at least maybe an observation from Michael in the YouTube stream too, because we were going back and forth in the comments, talking about St. Mary's chances of beating Alabama, because I think it is a legit chance. I think they have a legitimate shot at beating Alabama, and I wouldn't be overly stunned if it happens. Now, in my bracket, I picked Alabama to beat St. Mary's, but it's not going to be easy, especially given how Alabama played today and how poorly they rebounded on the defensive side of the basketball. But Michael asked, how do these small schools recruit so well and South Carolina struggles bringing in the talent? That's an interesting question. I think I don't want to say advantages. South Carolina has an advantage over all these schools. They have resource advantages that schools like St. Mary's can't bring. But if you look at the common theme of mid-majors that always are either favorited to, make upsets, expected to make upsets, or make deep runs, the ones who do that are usually always in that discussion, like St. Mary's. Randy Bennett's been there. He's coaching for a long, long time. He's one of the best coaches in our game. And that's a guy who could have taken any Power 5 job. And I say Power 5 because I'm including the Big East in there. He could have taken any Power 5 job he wanted, right? But that's a guy that wins 25 to 30 games a year. His teams are always really competitive in the NCAA tournament. Only one second weekend, but he recruits a specific area. He recruits a lot of foreign players. He recruits a lot of guys that fit his system. And I think that's when you look at some of the discrepancies. There are players that are recruited for fit, maybe not star ranking. I think sometimes these Power 5 schools get a little too obsessed with star ranking, and that's not the case for South Carolina. But I'm looking at, other schools who will chase after a guy because On3 or 24/7 said he's one of the best players in the country. Sometimes you got to evaluate based on fit. And St. Mary's recruits guys that are great offensive rebounders, that are reliable shooters, guys who don't beat themselves. St. Mary's is always tops in the country in turnover rate. They're always tops in the country when it comes to being reliable shooters. I know free throw shooting this year, they're not a very good free throw shooting team, which is kind of out of the norm for a Randy Bennett coach team. And when Mark Few was building Gonzaga, before he built them to what they are now, it was a lot of guys that fit and were overlooked. You have to be great at scouting, because if you're not going to get blue chip recruits, you got to find guys that are great fits for what you do as a coach. When you are coaching these teams and you're recruiting and you're building your roster and you have an idea of what you want to do, you got to get players that fit that, right? Like it wouldn't behoove St. Mary's to get a 3-star point guard who runs up tempo, a guy who exceeds or excels in a fast-paced game. Someone like what maybe Jordan Sears was for Tennessee Martin, who's the point guard for LSU this year. Tennessee Martin ran a high up-tempo offense. He is in transition a lot. Good player at Tennessee Martin, but that's not the type of player that Randy Bennett needs to run his system at St. Mary's. I think the thing with South Carolina is this year the biggest objective I would have for this team is that you got to be able to recruit guys in the transfer portal with fit. They get talent. Like Nick Pringle's a talented player. Jamari Thomas is a really talented player. They weren't great fits. And I think that was really where this team fell short, is from a basketball perspective, the fit maybe wasn't there. You'll bring in talent at South Carolina. Now, in terms of a depth of talent, you did not have the same just raw number of players who are superbly talented compared to a team like Missouri or even Georgia this year, right, had a little more talent on that team. Sometimes it's all about fit. And in the first hour of the show, I think a lesson that South Carolina can learn from Kansas is when you get players from the portal, they may be productive players, they may be great gets, they may be highly touted, but if the fit's not right from a basketball perspective, you're going to find yourself underachieving. Fantastic show today. Thank you to Jack Veltri for hanging out with me. Thanks to Twin Peaks for allowing me to chill out here and talk ball all day. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll talk to you again with Jay Phillips on Monday.